Hashtag the Khipu of the Inca. High in the Peruvian Andes, where the air grows thin and the mountains seem to touch the sky itself, there exists a mystery that has confounded scholars for nearly 500 years. It is not written in any alphabet that we recognize. Contains no words, no letters, no recognizable symbols at all. And yet, it spoke volumes to an entire empire, an empire so vast that it stretched across 3 million square kilometers of some of the world's most unforgiving terrain. The object is called a Khipu, sometimes spelled Khipu. To the untrained eye, it appears almost humble, a horizontal cord, usually made of cotton, from which dozens or even hundreds of thinner cords hang downward, some of them knotted, some of them plain. The colors vary: cream and brown and deep indigo and red. A single Khipu might be no larger than a hand. Others span the length of a man's arm. And yet, what these knotted strings could record, what they could preserve, what they could communicate across the vast distances of the Inca realm, that question remains, even now, only partially understood. The Inca called themselves the Tawantinsuyu, the four parts together. For little more than a century, from roughly 1438 until the Spanish conquest in 1533, they built an empire that rivaled Rome in its ambition, if not in its longevity. They had no wheeled vehicles on roads that would have made wheels impossible anyway. They had no domesticated beasts of burden except the llama and alpaca. They had no written language in any conventional sense. And yet they administered, taxed, conscripted, organized, and recorded the movements of millions of people across terrain so extreme that even today, with modern roads and helicopters, the logistics seem staggering. The Khipu was their answer. In the early days of the Spanish conquest, the colonizers encountered these mysterious cords and almost immediately sought to destroy them. There was, first, the practical concern. The Khipu systems might allow the indigenous population to preserve their old records and resist Spanish authority. There was also a theological anxiety. Anything that could not be reconciled with Christian practice seemed inherently suspicious, possibly demonic. When the Spanish priest and colonial administrator Juan Polo de Ondegardo encountered Khipu in the 1560s, he ordered their systematic destruction. Thousands were burned. A way of recording of memory itself was being erased from the world. But some survived. A few were hidden away. Others were preserved by chance, collected as curiosities, stored in monasteries, tucked into private collections. By the 19th century, as indigenous peoples were being rediscovered through the romantic lens of European scholarship, the Khipu began to attract serious academic attention. Scholars realized they had before them not a child's toy or a decorative object, but a genuine recording system. The question became urgent. Could it be decoded? The first breakthrough came from understanding numbers. By the end of the 19th century, scholars like Leonce Angulo and later Locke Henry had recognized the obvious. Certain Khipu were used to record quantitative data. The knots themselves were not random. They followed patterns. A series of knots clustered together in a particular way recorded a number. The position of the knots along the cord mattered. The type of knot mattered. A figure-8 knot, called an S-knot, recorded ones. Clusters of overhand knots, simple knots tied in succession, recorded larger numbers, arranged in a decimal system that went ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands. This was a recording system beyond any doubt. It was, many argued, mathematics rendered in fiber. The Khipu that have survived are not particularly numerous. Across the entire span of Inca territory and the centuries since the conquest, fewer than 1,000 Khipu remain in museums and collections around the world. Given that the Inca Empire employed Khipu administrators called Quipucamayak, literally, keepers of the Khipu, across every major settlement, the total number that once existed must have been in the tens of thousands, possibly far more. The loss is staggering. It is as if a library the size of Alexandria had been largely consumed by fire, and we were left trying to piece together its contents from a handful of surviving volumes. Yet, even with a quantitative system understood, the deeper mystery remained unsolved. Yes, the numbers could be read. But what were they counting? If a Khipu had a main cord with 5 pendant cords hanging from it, and the first pendant had 20 knots in the ones position and 3 knots in the tens position, recording the number 33, what did 33 mean? 33 what? 33 people? 33 head of llama? 33 measures of maize? 33 days? Without context, the number is merely a number, sterile, meaningless. And there are Khipu that have no numbers on them at all. These are the ones that truly perplex the scholarly world. Cords of different colors are arranged in patterns. Some are knotless. Some have what appear to be small knots or wrappings that may or may not be informational. The Khipu, called the Inca Khipu, housed at the American Folklife Center in Washington, D.C., remains one of the most studied and least understood objects in the world. Scholars have proposed that it might be a religious or ceremonial text, a mnemonic device, a narrative record, even a kind of poetry. Others suggest it could be an astronomical calendar, a map, an organizational chart. The truth is, no one knows. This is where the mystery deepens. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphics, which were eventually decoded because they appeared alongside Greek text in the Rosetta Stone, the Khipu have no such bilingual key. Unlike Mycenaean Linear B, which was broken through by comparing the symbol patterns to the structure of known languages, the Khipu connect to no written language that survived to the modern age. The Inca had a language, Quechua, which is still spoken by millions across the Andes today, but they appear to have recorded it, if at all, only rarely and incompletely on Khipu. The connection between the knots and the words, if it ever existed, has been severed. The Spanish conquest was catastrophic not merely for the people of the Inca realm, but for the knowledge systems themselves. The Khipu administrators, the Quipucamayoc, were often eliminated or integrated into Spanish colonial service, forced to serve Spanish needs rather than Inca ones. The educational systems that trained new keepers of the Khipu collapsed. The institutional knowledge that explained what each Khipu meant, how to read it, how to create it, that knowledge lived in human memory, in oral traditions, in the minds of specialists. When those people died, often having been forbidden from passing on their knowledge to the next generation, the ability to read the Khipu died with them. Yet from the handful of historical texts written by Spanish chroniclers who bothered to observe the system before it vanished, men like Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala, an indigenous nobleman who documented Inca customs in the early 1600s, we know that Khipu were far more sophisticated than we might imagine. They recorded census data, tribute obligations, storage inventories, military rosters. The Quipucamayoc were trained specialists, held to standards of accuracy. A mistaken knot could mean miscounting an entire province's population or miscalculating the stores needed to feed a labor force. These were not simple devices. They were, arguably, a technology of administration and control as sophisticated as any that existed in the ancient world. And here is where we arrive at the central puzzle that has animated Khipu research for the past century and a half. We can see that the system worked. We know that it was complex. We have specimens in our hands. And yet we cannot fully read them. We can extract numbers sometimes. We can make educated guesses about context based on where the Khipu was found or what historical records tell us was happening in that place at that time. But to genuinely decode a Khipu, to pick it up and understand, with certainty and without reference to external sources, what it says remains, for the vast majority of surviving examples, impossible. The scholars who have devoted their lives to this problem are not deterred by the impossibility. They are energized by it. The scholars who have devoted their lives to this problem are not deterred by the impossibility. They are energized by it. In laboratories and university offices across Peru, the United States, and Europe, researchers continue to examine the surviving Khipu with tools that would have seemed like magic to the Quipucamayoc themselves. High-resolution photography captures the exact geometry of every knot. Spectroscopy analyzes the dye compounds in the threads, sometimes revealing patterns invisible to the naked eye. Computer algorithms search for statistical patterns across multiple Khipu, looking for the fingerprints of a language embedded in fiber and knot. The work is painstaking, often thankless, conducted by people who know they may not live to see the breakthrough they pursue. Yet they persist, because something profound is at stake in the attempt. What hangs in the balance is not merely an academic puzzle, however elegant. It is a question about human knowledge itself, and about what happens when a civilization's intellectual achievements are systematically erased. The Spanish conquest of Peru was not a casual displacement. It was a deliberate destruction. The extirpation campaigns of the 16th and 17th centuries, undertaken with missionary zeal, were designed to eliminate every trace of Inca spiritual and administrative practice. Khipu were burned. The knowledge held by the Quipucamayoc was dispersed, forgotten, or carried into silence by people who understood the cost of resistance. What we hold today are fragments. Perhaps 1,500 or so Khipu survive in museums and collections worldwide, and these are only the examples that happen to be preserved or hidden away. Thousands more were lost. To decode even a fraction of these surviving Khipu would be to recover a voice that was meant to be silenced forever. It would be to read, across 500 years, the actual words, if we can call them that, of a people speaking about themselves. Their harvests, their debts, their children, their dead. Not the words of conquerors. Not the interpretations of missionaries. But the direct testimony of the Inca civilization, preserved in the only language that truly belonged to them. This is why the work continues. This is why researchers still gather around these ancient strings, studying them with reverence and scientific rigor, refusing to let them remain mute. There is something almost haunting about the premise itself. Imagine possessing a library of books in a language no one can quite remember. Imagine being able to see the structure, the grammar, the careful organization, and yet the meaning remains tantalizingly out of reach. This is the condition of the Khipu in the modern world. They are present and absent at once. They are speaking and silent. They are a monument to human ingenuity, and they are a wound left by history. The reality is that we may never fully decode all of them. Some Khipu may have recorded information whose context is now irrevocably lost. Local records, agricultural data, or personal accounts whose significance has no echo in surviving Spanish chronicles. Some may have contained knowledge that only made sense to those trained in the system, the Quipucamayoc whose expertise died with them. Some may have used regional variants or innovations that diverged from the standard form. The Khipu system, for all its sophistication, was not monolithic. It evolved over centuries. It adapted to local needs. It may have been more flexible, more variable than our current models assume. And perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps the Khipu should remain, in some sense, inscrutable, a reminder that not every truth can be translated. Not every meaning can be extracted and made transparent to foreign eyes. The Quipucamayoc guarded their knowledge carefully. They understood its power. They trained for years to master the system. There was an integrity, a kind of sacred responsibility in that exclusivity. To fully crack the Khipu code might be, in some paradoxical way, to complete the work of conquest in a more subtle form. The absorption of Inca knowledge into the Western archive, where it becomes data to be classified and analyzed. Yet we cannot help but reach toward understanding. We are creatures who seek meaning. We find it intolerable to stand before an artifact and know nothing. And so the work will go on, not out of arrogance, but out of a kind of love. A desire to hear, across the gulf of centuries, what the Inca had to say. Perhaps one day a breakthrough will come. Perhaps a young researcher will find the key that has eluded so many. Perhaps she will hold up a Khipu and suddenly the knots will speak, and we will hear the voice of a census taker from 1480, or a store official from Cusco, or a farmer from the high valleys, recording their world in the only language they had. It would be a remarkable moment, and it would change forever our understanding of what human beings are capable of when they need to keep record of their lives. Until then, the Khipu remain exactly what they have always been. A challenge, a mystery, and a profound testimony to a civilization that built its empire not with an alphabet, but with knots. If you'd like to join us on the Trail of the Lost, please tell us in the comments below which fallen civilization you'd like us to explore next.